The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Madison Blake moved gracefully across the boardroom of Bennett Enterprises, the very company she was about to seize. Her silk blouse hugged her frame, tucked into a tailored pencil skirt, and her gold Cartier watch peeked subtly from beneath her cuff. To the untrained eye, she was just another executive assistant, an elegant, composed figure serving coffee at the Bennett family's high-stakes business meeting. But the truth? She was the most powerful person in the room. Eleanor Bennett, the matriarch of the family, adjusted her ill-fitting knockoff designer blazer, eyes glinting with amusement as she watched Madison. "Careful not to spill," Eleanor sneered, tapping her long manicured nails against the table. "We wouldn't want you embarrassing the family more than you already do." A ripple of laughter spread around the table. The executives, all part of the Bennett inner circle, exchanged smug glances. Madison, calm and steady, poured the coffee into a pristine porcelain cup, her expression unreadable. Across the table, Ryan Bennett, her husband, kept his eyes glued to his laptop screen, pretending not to hear. 5 years. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of silent complicity. He had mastered the art of avoidance, the fine balance between being his mother's dutiful son and Madison's indifferent husband. He never interfered when Eleanor belittled her, never defended her when the family laughed at her expense. And Madison? She had played along. She had allowed them to think she was a nobody, a trophy wife, a social climber, a pretty decoration who had nothing to offer beyond her appearance, not for much longer. "Madison," Eleanor's voice cut through her thoughts. "Hurry up, coffee girl. Our CEO is arriving any minute, and we need to appear professional." Madison bit back a smirk. Oh, this was going to be fun. The boardroom doors swung open, and the chatter died down as a tall, sharply dressed man entered. Jason Reed, the public face of Novatech Industries, the tech empire that Madison secretly owned. His confident stride faltered the moment he saw her, coffee pot in hand, pouring into Eleanor's cup. His sharp, calculating eyes flickered with confusion. "Mrs. Bennett?" Jason asked cautiously, his voice controlled but questioning. Madison turned to him smoothly, a slow, knowing smile curving her lips. "Just Madison," she corrected lightly, her gaze locking onto his. She saw the silent understanding in his expression. Jason was sharp. He knew better than to react. "Cream and sugar?" she asked casually, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A flicker of amusement crossed his features before he nodded. "Black, please." Eleanor, oblivious to the exchange, practically shoved Madison aside, her eagerness oozing desperation. "Mr. Reed, it's an honor to have you here," she gushed. "Please ignore our daughter-in-law. She's just helping out since we didn't get proper catering today." Madison felt Jason's gaze burning into her, but she kept her expression cool, impassive. Jason's brows lifted slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Your daughter-in-law?" he repeated, his voice neutral. Eleanor sighed dramatically, as if it pained her to acknowledge it. "Unfortunately." Madison took her seat at the far end of the table, calmly pulling out her phone under the table and sending a message to Jason. "Play along. You'll understand soon." Jason's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then subtly nodded. Madison turned her attention back to Eleanor, who was launching into her usual monologue. "Our family business has been thriving for decades," Eleanor was saying. "We've built an empire, one that my son Ryan will soon lead as CEO." Jason folded his hands on the table, leaning back slightly. "Before we discuss titles," he said smoothly, "perhaps we should first review the company's current standing." A shadow of irritation crossed Eleanor's face. "There's no issue with our standing. We're stronger than ever." Jason tilted his head slightly, glancing at Madison before returning his attention to Eleanor. "I've reviewed the financials," he said mildly. "There's a concerning drop in revenue over the past 3 quarters. Eleanor's smile stiffened, but she waved a dismissive hand. "A temporary slump," she said airily. "Our competitors are adjusting their strategies, but we're positioned for exponential growth." Madison's phone buzzed with notifications. She glanced down briefly. "Oliver, we've secured the last batch of shares, finalizing the transfer." She exhaled slowly, masking her satisfaction behind an indifferent expression. She could feel it, the tension tightening, the calm before the storm. Eleanor, still oblivious, was rambling on about legacy and vision, her arrogance keeping her blind to reality. Madison waited, silent, observing. Eleanor glanced at her, as if only just remembering her presence. "You should take notes, Madison," she said condescendingly. "This is how real businesses are run." Madison gave a polite, unreadable smile. "Oh, I'm taking notes," she said smoothly. "Plenty of them." Eleanor narrowed her eyes but didn't press further. Jason cleared his throat. "About the acquisition offer?" Eleanor leaned forward, a smug smile curling her lips. "Ah, yes," she said. "Your offer is lower than we anticipated." Jason's expression didn't change. "Lower?" Eleanor nodded. "We believe our company's valuation is much higher." Madison bit back another smirk. "You have no idea how low it really is." Jason remained calm, unreadable, but Madison could see the amusement dancing in his eyes. Eleanor was negotiating over a company that was already out of her hands. Madison checked her watch. "It's almost time." She stood. "I need to step out." Eleanor scoffed. "Typical. No respect for family matters. This is why we're keeping the business within the real family." Madison smiled. "Oh, you'll regret saying that." She picked up her purse, walking toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Before stepping out, she turned slightly toward Jason. "I'll see you at our next meeting," she said lightly. Jason's lips twitched slightly. "Of course, Madam CEO." The room fell into stunned silence. Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from her grasp, shattering against the floor. Ryan went rigid, his face draining of color. "Madison," he choked out. "What? What is going on?" Madison adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, then smiled. "Oh, I think it's time we clarify who is acquiring whom." She stepped through the doors without looking back. The real game was about to begin. The city skyline glowed against the night as Madison Blake stood in front of her floor-to-ceiling penthouse windows, a glass of whiskey in hand. New York City stretched beneath her, a glittering sea of power, wealth, and opportunity. Tonight, she was no longer the coffee girl. Across the spacious penthouse, Oliver Hayes sat on the edge of her Italian leather couch, reviewing the latest financial projections on his tablet. His usual smirk widened as he turned toward her. "Tomorrow's the big day," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "They have no idea we own 49% of Bennett Enterprises." Madison didn't turn away from the window. She took a slow sip of her drink, letting the warmth slide down her throat. "By noon, we'll have the remaining 51%, she murmured. Oliver chuckled, leaning back against the couch. "Eleanor's been running her mouth about their so-called family legacy, completely blind to the fact that she's already lost." Madison smirked, but her grip on the glass tightened slightly. For 5 years, she had watched Eleanor Bennett build herself up as an untouchable matriarch, treating Madison like a tolerated outsider rather than a member of the family. She had let them laugh at her, let them dismiss her, let them believe she was nothing. And now she was about to bury them. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Samantha Carter, her personal assistant, walked in, efficient, poised, and always 2 steps ahead of any crisis. She held out a tablet, her expression unreadable. "The final numbers," she said. Madison took the tablet, scanning the data. Bennett Enterprises was on the edge of disaster, hemorrhaging money, choking on bad investments, and teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Yet Eleanor still thought she had control. Madison let out a slow breath. "And the shell companies?" "All in place," Samantha confirmed. "Every purchase has been made through third-party investments. Eleanor doesn't even realize she's been selling to us." Oliver let out a low whistle. "Damn, this is brutal." Madison smiled. "That's the problem with people like Eleanor," she said. "They never see their own downfall coming." Oliver nodded toward the tablet. "And Ryan?" Madison's jaw tightened. Her husband. The man she had once loved. The man who had let his mother tear her down, piece by piece. Samantha shifted slightly, sensing the change in Madison's mood. "He's been trying to call you," she murmured. Madison sighed, pulling out her phone. "Ryan, can we talk? Mom's getting suspicious." "Ryan. Madison, please. Something feels off." "Ryan, Are you home? I'll come by. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Ryan wasn't the villain here. He was just weak. For 5 years he had stood by and watched his mother degrade her. He had let them treat her like an accessory, a disposable piece of decoration, rather than his wife. And now, when he could feel something shifting, he wanted to talk? Madison exhaled through her nose and locked the screen. Ryan's not the problem anymore, she muttered. Oliver arched a brow. You're not even going to give him a warning? Madison's lips curled into a cold smile. He's had 5 years of warnings, she said. He ignored them all. She turned back to the window, watching the city pulse beneath her feet. Tomorrow, everything would change.
Chapter
11:43 p.m. A different part of the city. Ryan Bennett sat in the back of his black Range Rover, scrolling through his phone for the 5th time in the past 10 minutes. Madison hadn't responded. Something about that made his stomach twist uncomfortably. He wasn't stupid. He knew his mother was a nightmare, but Madison had always been so patient, so composed. She never fought back, never raised her voice. She absorbed every insult and moved on. But lately something felt different. There was a distance between them that hadn't been there before, a shift in the way Madison looked at him, not with love or frustration, but something colder, more calculating. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, debating whether to drive to their penthouse, when his mother's name flashed across the screen. He sighed, pressing accept. "Ryan," Eleanor's voice was clipped, impatient. "Are you still planning to meet me early before tomorrow's meeting?" Ryan hesitated. Yeah. Why?" "Because your wife is acting strange," Eleanor muttered. "She walked out of today's meeting like she owned the place." Ryan frowned. "She's probably just busy." Eleanor let out a sharp laugh. "Busy?" she scoffed. "That woman has never worked a real day in her life." Ryan winced but said nothing. Eleanor continued, her tone low and scheming. "Keep an eye on her," she said. "Something isn't right." Ryan's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he agreed with his mother. Something wasn't right. And he had a feeling he was about to find out exactly what it was. 7:30 a.m., the final move. The next morning, Madison sat in the back of a black town car, her fingers gliding over her phone screen as she reviewed the final contracts. Oliver sat beside her sipping a coffee. "Nervous?" Madison smiled slightly. "Not even a little." Oliver chuckled. "God, you're terrifying." She tilted her head toward him. "Would you rather Eleanor win?" Oliver snorted. "Absolutely not." The car pulled up outside the towering glass headquarters of Bennett Enterprises. A swarm of reporters and financial analysts stood outside, ready for what they thought was just another merger meeting. Jason Reed was already waiting in the lobby, his arms crossed, a slow smirk tugging at his lips. "Morning, Madam CEO," he greeted. Madison smoothed down her blazer. "Ready to ruin a family's day?" Jason teased. Madison's eyes gleamed. "Oh," she murmured, "more than ready." She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, heading toward the boardroom where her in-laws sat, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. The air inside the Bennett Enterprises boardroom was thick with confidence, the kind that came from absolute ignorance. Eleanor Bennett walked in first, chin lifted high, exuding the aura of a queen ready to preside over her empire. She had no idea she was walking straight into her downfall. Behind her, Ryan Bennett followed, his grip on his briefcase a little too tight, his gaze flickering toward the empty chair where Madison usually sat. She wasn't there. Yet. Eleanor took her seat at the head of the table, adjusting the diamond brooch on her blazer, her confidence unwavering. "Let's get started," she announced, offering a smug glance at Ryan. "With my son taking over as CEO, I expect today's meeting to be a mere formality." Jason Reed leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, his expression unreadable. "Before we discuss titles," he said smoothly, "perhaps we should first clarify who owns the company." A cold silence fell over the room. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "We do, obviously." Jason didn't blink. "Do you?" A sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. The boardroom doors swung open, and Madison Blake stepped inside. The room fell into complete, stunned silence. She wasn't wearing the subdued elegance of a corporate wife today. No, this was Madison Blake, the CEO. A flawless, tailored Chanel blazer hugged her frame, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she strode to the front of the room. She didn't spare Ryan a glance, didn't acknowledge Eleanor's gaping expression. She simply placed a thick folder on the table and said with cool precision, "Actually," Madison said, tilting her head slightly, "let's clarify who is acquiring whom." Eleanor blinked, her mind trying to catch up. "Excuse me?" Jason smirked. "Novatech Industries currently owns 48% of Bennett Enterprises." A flicker of uncertainty flashed in Ryan's eyes. "Wait, what?" Madison slid another document across the table. "As of this morning, we've secured the remaining 52%. A choked gasp escaped Eleanor's lips. The champagne glass in her hand slipped, shattering against the floor. Ryan's face drained of color. "Madison," he choked out, "what the hell is going on?" Madison's expression remained calm, impassive. "Would you like me to explain?" she asked. "Or should I let your mother lie to you one last time?" Eleanor shot up from her seat, her chair scraping against the polished wood floor. "This is impossible!" she spat. "We would have known if someone was acquiring shares." Madison arched a perfectly sculpted brow. "Would you?" she asked, feigning curiosity. "Like you knew about the shell companies buying up your stock?" She slid another document across the table. "Or the real reason your biggest contracts were canceled last quarter?" Eleanor snatched at the papers, her fingers trembling as she scanned the information. Ryan grabbed another file, his voice cracking. You were spying on us?" Madison laughed softly. "No, Ryan," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I conducted due diligence, something you might have noticed if you'd actually read the reports I gave you last year." Ryan's gaze snapped up, his eyes wild. "You gave me reports?" Madison nodded. "And you chose to believe your mother," she continued, her tone mockingly gentle, "when she told you I was meddling in family business." Eleanor's breathing was shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. Jason, amused, leaned in slightly. "Mrs. Bennett," he said smoothly, "everything checks out. Novatech now owns Bennett Enterprises." Eleanor collapsed back into her chair, her face paling. Ryan shook his head violently. "This isn't over," he growled. "We'll fight this, our lawyers." Madison tilted her head slightly, her smile sharpening. "Your lawyers?" she repeated, her voice laced with amusement. Her nails drummed softly against the table. "They work for the board now." Her eyes gleamed. "And as of today?" A small pause. "The board works for me." Eleanor let out a low, strangled sound, realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. Ryan's hands fisted at his sides, his voice dropping. "Why?" he asked. "Why go through all this pretense?" Madison inhaled slowly, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. 5 years ago, she murmured, I offered to help. I had the expertise, the connections, the capital. But you? She looked at Eleanor. You looked me in the eye and said, her lips curled, gold-digging daughters-in-law should know their place. A silence so thick it could crush the air filled the room. Eleanor's hands shook. Jason, still leaning back in his chair, let out a low whistle. Well, he murmured, amused, this is awkward. Eleanor's voice cracked. You took everything. Madison's smile didn't falter. No, she said simply. I saved everything. She gestured to the documents. This company was 3 months from bankruptcy, she said. Your employees, the ones you claim to care about, were about to lose their jobs. I didn't take anything. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I rescued it from your mismanagement. Eleanor's shoulders slumped, her breath unsteady. Ryan, his voice hoarse, tried again. Madison, he whispered, please, we can talk about this. Madison exhaled softly, tilting her head slightly. Like we talked about it last Christmas? She murmured. When your mother announced you as CEO and you sat there silently while she told me to focus on more suitable activities, like planning dinner parties? Ryan flinched. Madison shook her head. That time is past, Ryan. She turned on her heel, walking toward the door. As she reached it, she paused briefly, casting one last look over her shoulder. Now, she said, it's time for business. And with that, she walked out. Her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, she strode down the hallway, her phone buzzing with a message from Jason. Jason. Brilliantly played, boss. Board's ready when you are. Madison smiled. The real work would begin tomorrow. Today was about justice, served with a side of irony, and a perfect cup of coffee. The fallout was immediate. By the time Madison Blake stepped into her office that afternoon, the business world was already on fire. Every major financial news outlet had picked up the story. Billionaire CEO secretly takes over in-laws company, power move of the year. Eleanor Bennett loses control in shocking corporate coup. The coffee girl who became a CEO. How Madison Blake outsmarted a family dynasty. The headlines were relentless. The media was eating it up. Investors were thrilled. And the Bennett family? They were in shambles. Madison stood at her office window, watching the chaos unfold from above. The phone on her desk buzzed continuously. Reporters, analysts, executives, all scrambling for a statement. She ignored them all. Across the room, Oliver Hayes leaned back against her desk, his arms crossed, watching her with admiration. You did it, he said, grinning. Bennett Enterprises is officially yours. Madison exhaled slowly, taking in the moment. She had won, but she wasn't done yet. Not even close. Bennett Family Estate, 6:30 p.m. The Bennett mansion was eerily quiet that evening. Eleanor sat in her lavish study, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the TV as news anchors dissected her downfall. Her hand trembled slightly as she took a sip. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ryan sat across from her, his face blank, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "You're too quiet!" Eleanor snapped, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Say something." Ryan's jaw clenched. "What the hell do you want me to say?" Eleanor slammed the glass onto the table, the sound sharp and jarring. "You're supposed to be CEO!" she hissed. "You're supposed to be the one in control." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I was never in control," he muttered. "That was Madison the entire time." Eleanor's eyes burned with rage. "She humiliated us." Ryan's phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. Madison. His breath caught. Slowly, he picked up the phone and read the message. Madison. "Meet me at the penthouse. We need to talk." His stomach twisted. "Who is it?" Eleanor demanded. Ryan hesitated. "Madison," Eleanor scoffed. "Don't you dare go crawling back to her. That woman ruined us." Ryan clenched his jaw, his thoughts a storm of anger, regret, and confusion. He stood up. Eleanor's eyes flashed with warning. "Ryan," she snapped, "don't you dare walk out that door." Ryan met her gaze. For the first time in his life, he didn't back down. "I need answers," he said. And then he walked out. Madison's penthouse, 8:15 p.m. Ryan arrived at the penthouse, his heart pounding as he stepped inside. Madison was waiting for him, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city. She didn't turn as he entered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Madison finally said, her voice quiet but firm, "You're only here because you lost." Ryan exhaled sharply. "That's not true." Madison turned, her gaze sharp, unreadable. "Oh?" she asked. "So you weren't fine with standing by while your mother humiliated me for years?" Ryan's throat tightened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Madison let out a humorless laugh. "Ryan, your mother called me a gold digger to my face. She made sure I was never respected in your family, and you just let her." Ryan's shoulders tensed. "I was trying to keep the peace." Madison's eyes darkened. "No, Ryan," she said coldly. "You were keeping yourself comfortable." Ryan ran a frustrated hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Madison, you lied to me. You planned this. Behind my back." Madison exhaled slowly. "Yes," she admitted, "because you never would have believed me otherwise." Ryan's breath caught. She was right. A heavy silence settled between them. Finally, Madison sighed, her gaze softening just a fraction. "You don't get to be angry, Ryan," she said. "You let me suffer for 5 years, and when I finally fought back?" Her lips curled slightly. "You're upset that I won." Ryan stared at her, his emotions a mess of anger, guilt, and something else he couldn't name. "I didn't think you were capable of this," he admitted. Madison's smile was sharp, knowing. "I know," she said. "That was your first mistake." Ryan's chest tightened. He swallowed. "I just need to know. Was any of it real?" Madison held his gaze. "For a while," she admitted. Ryan's stomach sank. "But the second you chose your mother over me," Madison continued, "I stopped choosing you." Ryan felt something break inside him. Madison exhaled, stepping away from the window. "Go home, Ryan," she said softly. "This conversation is over." Ryan hesitated. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. Bennett Enterprises. The next day, Eleanor stormed into Madison's office, her expression a mask of pure fury. "You think this is over?" she hissed. Madison barely glanced up from her desk. "It is over," she said calmly. "You just don't know it yet." Eleanor's hands trembled with rage. "You will regret this," she seethed. "No one will ever trust you in business again." Madison chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "Oh, Eleanor," she said smoothly, amusement dancing in her eyes. "I don't need their trust. I have their respect." She slid a folder across the desk. "You have 2 choices," Madison continued. "Sign the papers and walk away quietly, or fight me and lose everything." Eleanor's breathing was shallow, furious, but she knew she had already lost. With shaking hands, she grabbed a pen and signed. Madison smiled. Checkmate. 1 week later, news headlines. Madison Blake restructures Bennett Enterprises. A new era begins. Eleanor Bennett officially steps down, forced out by brilliant CEO coup. The woman who beat a dynasty. What's next for Madison Blake? Madison's office. Oliver walked in, tossing a newspaper onto her desk. "You're officially the most powerful woman in the industry," he said. Madison smirked. "Feels good," she admitted. Her phone buzzed. "Ryan, I signed the divorce papers." Madison sighed, then deleted the message without responding. She had a company to run. And this was just the beginning. A full year had passed since Madison Blake walked out of that fateful boardroom, leaving Eleanor Bennett and her son Ryan drowning in the wreckage of their own arrogance. And in that time, everything had changed. Bennett Enterprises Annual Shareholders Meeting. New York City. The conference hall was packed. Hundreds of investors, board members, employees, and reporters filled the space, eagerly awaiting the State of the Company address from its new leader. The very leader they had once overlooked. As the crowd murmured, exchanging theories and speculation, a hush fell over the room as Madison Blake stepped onto the stage. She looked flawless, powerful, and completely in control. The Madison of a year ago, the silent wife serving coffee, was gone. This Madison? This was the CEO who had taken an empire and rebuilt it from the ashes. She stepped up to the podium, adjusting the mic with a practiced ease. Then she smiled. "Good morning, everyone." The room fell silent. "I stand before you today," Madison continued, "as the CEO of what is now one of the fastest-growing, most profitable corporations in the country." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. "In just 1 year, we have increased revenue by 58%, expanded into 3 new global markets, improved employee satisfaction to an all-time high." She let that sink in. 1 year ago, Eleanor had been boasting about Ryan's future as CEO. Now, Madison had turned the company into something they never could. She paused, then leaned forward slightly. "I remember," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate, "that someone once told me I was just the coffee girl." A chuckle rolled through the audience. Madison smiled. "Well," she continued, I'd like to thank them, because sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all." The room erupted in applause. She stepped back from the podium, letting the sound wash over her. This wasn't just a victory. This was vindication. Somewhere in Florida, a private country club. A bitter, angry voice cut through the warm afternoon air. "She's a manipulative, power-hungry viper." Eleanor Bennett sat with 3 other women, all dripping in wealth and old money, as she ranted over her martini. "She played the long game," Eleanor continued, seething. "She tricked us all." One of the women, a chilly blonde with too much Botox, sipped her drink. "I heard she's actually doing well," she mused. "Bennett Enterprises has never been stronger." Eleanor's face tightened with rage. "I built that company," she snapped. "And she stole it!" The women exchanged glances. Everyone knew the truth. Madison hadn't stolen anything. She had simply been smarter. Eleanor slammed down her glass, breathing heavily. "She'll regret this," she muttered. "She'll burn every bridge. No one will trust her." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her stomach twisting when she saw the sender. "Ryan, Mom, I think you should stop talking about Madison in public. You're embarrassing yourself." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly. She had lost everything: her company, her reputation, her son. And the worst part? Madison hadn't even needed to destroy her. She had simply let Eleanor destroy herself. Madison's office. New York City. A thick envelope sat on Madison's desk. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. Finalized divorce papers. Ryan had finally signed them. Madison leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. It was done. Her past with Ryan, officially erased. Her company, thriving. Her future, hers to control. As she set the papers aside, her assistant, Samantha Carter, peeked in. "There's something you should see." Madison lifted a brow. Samantha stepped inside, setting a small, elegantly wrapped box onto the desk. Madison's lips curled. She already knew who it was from. Slowly, she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, a brand new coffee maker. And next to it, a small note in Ryan's familiar handwriting. "Some people serve coffee, others build empires. Congratulations on yours." Madison stared at the words, a slow smirk forming. For the first time in years, Ryan had finally acknowledged her power. She closed the box, tossing the note into the trash. It was too little, too late. She had moved on, and now she had bigger things to focus on. Chatra. Madison's headquarters, the next morning. As Madison walked through the newly renovated Bennett Enterprises lobby, her eyes drifted to the gold-lettered sign that had just been installed. It read, "Success is best served with a side of humble beginnings." Madison smiled. The coffee girl? She had just built an empire. And this was only the beginning. The